I'm recording. Hey everyone, my name is Whitney, and welcome back to another episode of Spastic Chatter. Spastic Chatter is a platform meant to feature those in the cerebral palsy community, and I get together weekly with individuals with CP like myself to have a kind of uncensored chat about what it's really like living with this type of disability. And for this week's episode, I have Caleb, and he wrote in wanting to talk about his disability research because he's pursuing a master's degree. So I will go ahead and let Caleb introduce himself. So take it away, Caleb.
All right. Thank you, Whitney. And I'm Caleb Wells. I am a master's student at Wichita State University studying educational sociology with an emphasis in disability culture. And I am right now researching the sociological impacts of disability lawmaking as well as gender differences in disability differences and gender differences in the process of aging. So it's just a little bit about my research.
That's awesome. So what made you want to get into the research side of disability?
One day I was just sitting there because I was in my undergrad and I was studying secondary social science education, and I really enjoyed the research side of education and everything that we could improve on as we moved along in our daily lives and just leaving this world a better place than I found it. And if I can do that through my research, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. So take us through the process of starting of for somebody that doesn't know what we're talking about. Take us through the process of starting your research to getting to writing it to getting published. Is that one of your goals, or have you already got published, or is that one of your goals is to get published?
So it's actually funny that you bring up being published because when I started this paper, it started out as an innocent undergraduate project because I was sitting there with my undergrad advisor and she's like, this is going to be your thesis and this is going to be published. And I just kind of laughed it off. And then last week I just sent it off to a publisher to be edited. So
that's cool.
We're going through that process. But when I sit down and write, a lot of what I do is I sit down and observe what's really going on in the world and around me, because I feel like, especially in sociology, I don't really want to bang on my cohort here, but we tend to study sociology in sort of a vacuum of what we're trying to do. So sociology at its core is the study of movements and groups of people. And a lot of the time what we do when we study culture and different cultures and movements is we want to make everything perfect and fit into a box. And that's not really what's happening, because there's a lot of different environmental factors that go on into what we're trying to do. And so sometimes I feel like the best way to do something when you start a project is talk to people in the community and not just go off of what you read. Talk to people, see if this is really what is there, because sometimes it's completely different in the practice than what it is in the theory and in the research. So
is that what you?
That's really where I begin.
Yeah, so that's where you go out into the disability community and talk to people. Do you get research groups? Do you I don't know when I was doing my master's degree, and doing in my undergrad in psychology, they'd have people like sign up for like research groups, and like we'd like answer surveys and stuff like that. Is that uh, is that kind of
That's
like what you're talking about, or not really?
Yeah, so that's exactly what I'm really talking about. So I like to take focus groups. So I take a lot of different communities through Facebook is a great tool um, where I'll put it out to different support groups that I'm in, and once they reach out to me, I'll send them a survey or send them a series of questions that I have just to make sure that my theory fits the practice.
That's
So
nice. So what are you working on right now? I know that you wrote in and said something about like teenagers and gender. Uh, is that one of your
so
you're working on?
so right now my big project right now as I'm transitioning out of the 504 and law side of it, my big transition right now is I'm working on a project that studies the gender differences in CP, especially because we see as we look at the math and we look at the gendering process that boys with CP have challenges that are different than girls born with CP. And as we're growing up, what's happening is they're trying to fit all people with CP in the same box and not handle them with different gloves. So what the goal of this paper is to do is to show the importance of handling each case individually um, in its own space, as well as handling each gender differently. And also, the last part of this that I'm really excited about is being able to show that people with CP are capable of not only living alone but raising families, because that's the big scary thing, right? Because a lot of states, um, as we look at the CP community and the visual impairment community, those are really the two lanes that I work in, is that there are states that are trying to take kids away from disabled parents, and that's what needs to stop.
Yeah.
So that's really
I don't know.
the big part about it,
You brought up a good
and
point
where
there.
I want this to really go.
Yeah, you brought up a good point there. I don't think many people realize that that the state, if both the spouses have a disability, more than likely the state, depending on what state you live in, but I know like I live in Texas, the state is pretty much almost guaranteed to get involved if it becomes aware, if they become aware that both you and your spouse have a disability. Like I have friends that has been the case for them. So that's good that you brought that up, because most people most people aren't aware that is what happens. Sadly.
It, that that's the thing is, so I live in Kansas, and there's not really any case law that supports this because there is a bill right now sitting in the Kansas State House for protections for individuals who have disabilities that become parents. There's a state bill sitting in the House right now, but in Missouri, 35% of all children born to parents that both have disabilities are taken by the state for at least 6 months.
That is crazy.
And so that it's important to know this as people with disabilities, it's important to know this because it's something that's really neglected, because a lot of us don't really look into it until we start wanting to have kids.
Yeah.
And then we're down the river and trying to jump out of the boat.
Yeah.
So
it's good that we bring this up because like you don't want to have kids on the way and then realize that this is a possibility and a reality. So
and uh, and that's what I'd say. If you can afford it, find a good disability rights lawyer.
yeah.
And be your best advocate. That's what I'm also a special ed teacher at high school, and I tell my kids all the time, the best advocate is ourselves. If we're able to go out there and talk, nothing is going to change unless we can show people that we can change it ourselves. So that's really what I push for.
I have a master's in special ed, so we have that in common. But I don't have a teaching certificate. I just use it as a disability studies. So, but yeah, that's cool. So getting back to your research, is there one of I don't know how many different research topics you've done, but do you have a favorite that you've?
It's like asking me to pick a favorite child.
Yeah.
Because they're all so different, and they're all so beautiful in their own ways. I really enjoy talking about law, because disability law is in a weird space in society where it's forgotten about until something terrible happens. So it's important to understand where the movements and the disability rights movement has come from. So when I set out to write my 504 in Society paper, which is the one that I just sent off to be published, I really set off to talk about the history and Ed Roberts and the Freedom Riders and the people that really set the groundwork for me to be doing research like this. So I really think I love that topic more than anything, is being able to talk about advocacy in law.
Yeah, and that's a very important topic, and you brought up another good point that many people don't focus on the laws until something happens, and they kind of have for lack of a better word, they kind of have that oh shit moment where they need to figure out what's going on, but they don't have the resources or however you want to put it to figure out what's going on. So it's good to like have that knowledge beforehand in case something happens, so that you're prepared.
And it's important for people like me to read the case law and be able to give a voice to that case law, because a lot of the time the case law just sits in a file,
yeah,
and is not interpreted to the community as it should be.
And I also think it's interesting that it's good, in my opinion, that you are a person with a disability that's researching and advocating for other people with disabilities, because the majority, I don't want to say the majority of the time, but in my experience, when I go to read research papers, or even go to the law side of it, whoever I'm dealing with, they don't have that firsthand experience. They're just coming from the reading about it and then writing about it. They don't have that first hand knowledge, if that makes sense.
I think that's important, and with my research, it's really hard to keep my experience out of it because I try to be as impartial as possible.
Yeah.
But it's really important for me to be able to give life to where I'm at. And every one of my projects that I have written over the last 6 years has been reflective of where I'm at in my life. So I think that that's important to look at.
That's cool. So one last question. Unless you have unless do you have any other things you want to hit on or talk about related to your research? Anything?
I mean, not really, because I just think it's important to be out there and be your advocate. And if you're able to do that, able to go to state capitol and speak, and or at least write an email, I think that's the most important thing right now. We have the technology to make phone calls, email, text messages, and know your representatives and have that working relationship so we can move forward and move forward in our lives.
That's another good point. That if you don't, it's making your voice heard. Same thing goes with I know we're coming up on a re-election year. That people, if you want our community represented, the disability community or any community in general, you have to make your voice heard. So it's important to vote. Like you said, it's important to know who your representatives are, and all that entails. So you kind of answered this. Do you have any advice for someone that wants to pursue higher education and go into like the research field or anything like that?
The biggest advice that I got is don't take no for an answer, because if there is a university that won't fund your grant or your research because of your discrimination, or because of your disability or discrimination, you can find other places. And it's always important to look and shop around, as they like to say. And also, when you go into research, it's not going to be pretty. It was nothing that I really expected it to be. I love doing it, and I love everything that I get to see, but it's a lot of time reading documents and having to deal with inaccessible documents or documents that aren't what you necessarily need. Yeah. So just be persistent and don't take no, because if you have something to say, eventually somebody's going to listen.
Exactly. That's good advice. So, are you on to, where can people follow you if they want to follow you? Do you have social media?
So, I use Facebook and Twitter the most, and let me pull up my Twitter handle because I just changed it. So, my Twitter is at Caleb_Wells_54, and that's where I post a lot of my papers and a lot of my lectures. Right now I'm doing an online lecture series through Zoom about the paper about my directed project, which is 504 in Society, and all those will be up on Twitter. And then I'm at Caleb William Wells on Facebook. So,
and all that will be linked in the description. And thank you so much for writing in and wanting to be on the podcast. I really enjoyed it. And just to close out, if you want to be featured in an episode of Spastic Chatter, there is a email link in the description, and don't be afraid to reach out. Until next week. Or check back next week for another episode of Spastic Chatter. Thanks. Bye.